Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and there are reports that Keir Starmer is refusing to rule out allowing the European Court of Justice jurisdiction over some trade matters as he works on closer arrangements with the EU, something that would not only be what a majority of people want, but was promised in the manifesto which won him a landslide, so the public mandate is firmly established. But I'm going to try and explain why the European Court of Justice not only has an essential part to play. There is no way of getting a deal with the EU that doesn't include the ECJ. But why we should actually embrace it, not even consider it a price worth paying, starting off with this week's mad Brexit consequence. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So this week's completely insane Brexit scenario involves seeds. Apparently, it's quite common for companies to sell between one another regularly. So the idea is, you've got some stocks of tomato seeds or something, but then someone else is like, oh, we're running out of tomato seeds. Oh, don't worry, mate, we've got some we can give you. Make sure that you've got like stocks kept up. So this sometimes means that, a EU seed company buys stock from a British seed company and then at some point in the future ends up selling it back to well, not necessarily the same British company, a different British company maybe, depending on how stocks are doing, to make sure that stocks are good everywhere. It's a common practice, apparently. But when those seeds, which were produced in Britain, remember, have to be re-imported back into Britain, they're subject to exactly the same controls as if they'd come from the other side of the world. So another example of how we're making it more time consuming and expensive to be part of an efficient supply chain, which limits the business potential of being based in Britain and mean higher costs for British consumers, us. But this is especially mad because what we're talking about here is applying full import controls on our own products. Like we're not even giving mates rates to ourselves. Describe any Brexit trade barrier in detail and most people will agree it's not very helpful, we'd rather do without it. We know from recent polling that half of people in Britain think we need to move closer to the EU in order to boost the economy, to 36% thinking we can either keep things the same or actually diverge further to do so. We also know that people voted a Labour government in knowing that they were determined to forge closer links with the EU. So there is a clear enough public mandate. However, when it comes to policies that the public may approve of on the surface, you always have to look at the potential trade-offs. Like the public can be in favour of an outcome, but not necessarily the mechanism towards achieving it if they don't understand the process. It's why if you look at polling asking people if they want to join the EU, you could get an encouraging result. But then you look at polling asking them, do you still want to join if it means adopting the euro? Which by default it does. And the results are way less encouraging. And it's with that in mind, I'll refer you to a recent article in the Times talking about the fact that Keir Starmer, number 10 specifically, has refused to rule out accepting jurisdiction for the European Court of Justice. And so then you go to sell. So is this trade-off something that could sour public support for closer ties with the EU? Well, I'm not sure I've got recent polling to hand, so I can't show you anything. But ones I have seen in the past show that the majority of people are fine with the ECJ having a limited role if it means we get economic benefits. Which is marvellous because the ECJ only ever had a limited role even when we were full EU members. Remember, all they do is interpret EU law. All courts exist for is to interpret and enforce the law. Courts do not operate outside their areas of competence either. Indeed, there are sometimes when someone, say, brings a case to the European Court of Human Rights and they are told by the court, no, sorry, this is outside our area, you have to go somewhere else. So all courts, including the ECJ, only have a limited role anyway. But given that the ECJ's role is to be the final arbiter on EU rules, then obviously it's going to need a role if we want to break down trade barriers. It's really simple. If you want freer trade, you have to agree common standards. That's how it works. And which standards are we going to adopt? EU standards. That's the gold standard, right? It's normally in any trade agreement, really. If there's going to be anything close to free trading arrangements for anything, you have to have a system for arbitration if there's a dispute. We have one for we joined the CPTPP. So there's a system there. if someone has a dispute with us, or if we have a dispute with someone else, a panel will be set up to determine who's right and who's wrong. So if we want a better deal, whereby we align with relevant EU standards, as Labour have already made clear they intend, then the established authority on those standards is the ECJ. It's really that simple. And we do want a better deal because our economy's been hamstrung to the tune of over £100 billion a year from the extreme Tory Brexit. Also, in terms of public spending, we're missing out on about £50 billion worth of tax revenue a year. So the Treasury's missing out on about £50 billion. So without the extreme Tory Brexit, all of those unpopular policies that Reeves had to announce recently wouldn't have been necessary. Plus, she'd have had more than enough extra to be spending even more money on investment. We could have compensated the WASPy women without any fuss at all. We know that the majority want closer trade ties with the EU. It's possible that not everyone who wants easier trade with our neighbours understands the need for the courts. True, because the media don't bother to explain it to them. So am I saying that those people should accept the role of the ECJ as a price worth paying for easier trade, better jobs, higher growth, better public services? No, I'm saying we should actually welcome the involvement of the ECJ in the same way we would embrace the easier trade. The ECJ is not a downside. It's not a price to be paid. It's a benefit. Right now, we, for example, do not have legal protections as consumers that people living in EU countries have when it comes to the disputes on, terms of sales of products, whether it's goods or services. The courts exist to give us protections, but we're not a member of the court anymore. Don't get them. If we have a dispute in the UK with another UK company, say, we could use our domestic courts. If we have a dispute on European human rights, we can use the European Court of Human Rights. But where do you go if you've got a dispute with a seller in the EU? Well, the European Court of Justice. But in Britain, because we lost access to the online dispute resolution system, which is the nice, easy, cheap way to do it, we're in a very weak position now to settle any disputes you have unless you've got a lot of money to fight an expensive court battle, which would mean hiring lawyers in another country to appeal to a court where we've got no membership. We can try and take the seller to court with a British court, but it's like their judgment doesn't mean anything. The existence of a court is only a problem for those who intend to break the law. I'd also put this to anyone who seems hesitant about the concept of the ECJ being involved. If you find someone who says, "Oh, I'm not sure about this," go, "Okay, can you tell me about a time when the ECJ made your life more difficult?" Or EU laws in general. People were told that EU laws were restrictive. They had it rammed down their throats for years and years. But whenever I've talked to someone who was persuaded of that argument, "Oh, EU laws, not very good." It's like, okay, name me one that ever caused you problems. And I've yet to have anyone identify a law which actually existed. Some people give it a go. Most people realise they can't actually think of one. Some people give it a go. Don't even start on bendy bananas. But it either turns out to be a law that never existed or does exist. It's a law that existed, but it was a UK specific law. Didn't exist in other EU countries because it's not an EU law. But the former government's insistence on as small a role as possible for the ECJ, which basically meant no role at all in Britain, only a little bit in Northern Ireland, meant we had to have full third country trade barriers, when much easier trade was on offer even outside the EU. It means our exports are unnecessarily restricted, something that has particularly hit small businesses because small businesses are much less likely to be able to just do without their EU customers, but also much less likely to be able to manage the new import or export controls. It created the mad situation where we've even applied full import controls on our own products coming back into the country. So although the Tory media is going to try and hold up the ECJ as some sort of bogeyman again, it's obvious that it's going to be having a role. Labour have been clear they intend to align any standards with the EU that are needed to improve trade. The majority of people support it as long as it goes hand in hand with lower trade barriers. But people should really see the role of the court, I would say, as a benefit, not a price. It's like all courts. It exists to protect against those who break the law. So if you're someone who doesn't break the law, then you can only be a victim and the court can only be useful to you. Who seriously argues that we should be vulnerable to lawbreakers? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for listening. And until next time, I'll see you later.